A new life in Milan, a successful career, and a whirlwind romance with a charming man. For 29-year-old Giulia Tramontano, the future seemed bright, with a family on the horizon. But then, silence. At 7 months pregnant, Giulia vanishes into thin air. Her boyfriend claims she left after an argument, leaving behind her passport, her money, and all her plans. Her family insists she would never abandon her unborn child. What dark secrets lay hidden behind the facade of a perfect relationship? The search for Giulia would unravel a chilling web of deception, a calculated plot born of narcissism, and a devastating betrayal that pitted two women, victims of the same lie, against a man who would stop at nothing to maintain control. This is a story not just of a disappearance, but of a descent into a meticulously planned nightmare, where love turns to poison, and the truth is far more horrifying than anyone could imagine. 20-9-year-old Giulia Tramontano was last seen on the evening of May 28, 2023, in the small town of Sanago, Italy. While 7 months pregnant, she stopped responding to calls and messages from her family and friends, and suddenly, her phone went completely silent. It was her boyfriend, Alessandro Impagnaciello, who first reported her disappearance. He claimed that when he returned home from work, the house was empty, and he had no idea where Giulia might have gone. From the very beginning of the incident, there were many oddities. Giulia had left most of her personal belongings behind, and the plans she had made for the next few days did not suggest she was thinking of disappearing. As agents investigated what Giulia had been doing in the days before she vanished, they uncovered even more disturbing information. The night before her disappearance, Giulia had a major argument with Alessandro. She had described this to her mother, Laura Donna, and a close friend through messages. She was very upset and wrote about how bad the situation made her feel. But the most important question remained unanswered. What really happened on that terrible night? Did Giulia truly leave the house on her own? If so, why has no one seen her since that day? Over the next few days, detectives began to unravel a web of lies that would lead them to a horrifying truth. Giulia was born in Naples on May 2, 1994. She grew up in a supportive and loving environment. From a young age, her family taught her to be independent and self-confident. Although they were open to modern ideas, traditional family values were still very important to them. Giulia always knew she could return home to find comfort and guidance. She studied at a nearby school and was very successful in the arts. Due to her interest in architecture, she wanted to pursue a career in the real estate sector. She researched ways to earn money and dreamed of becoming a successful real estate consultant. After high school, she studied this field at university. Thanks to her analytical mindset and good communication skills, she quickly became an expert in the field. By the time she was 25, she had a good name in the industry. However, this was not enough for Giulia. She wanted to live in a city with great opportunities. Her job in her hometown had reached a saturation point. By the age of 26, she realized the local market was limited. Influenced by the stories her friends told from her time working at a real estate office, she decided to move to Milan. She saw the city as a place that would offer her a new beginning, new connections, and opportunities for professional growth. By the end of 2020, she had made her decision. For her, Milan had become a symbol of freedom, new relationships, and career development. Giulia acted quickly. She packed her belongings, said goodbye to her family and friends, and set off for the city she hoped would become her new home. As Giulia had just moved to Milan, she immediately got to work. The city's real estate market was fast-paced and highly competitive. You had to be confident and constantly try. Giulia adapted to this quickly. She made friends, attended business events, and closed deals. Her new life was exciting, But despite all the plans she made, she was bored and wanted more to be happy. It was at this time that she met Alessandro Impagnisciello. They met in Milan at a bar where her colleagues had invited her to celebrate a successful deal. Alessandro was a bartender at a luxury club inside a five-star hotel. He was friendly, outspoken, and someone who could easily get along with people. He was 1 year older than Julia. Julia was captivated by his confidence and charm. With him, she could relax, forget the stress of work, and enjoy the moment. Their relationship started smoothly. In the first few weeks, they went to restaurants, took walks in the city at night, and talked about the future. One night, Alessandro mentioned he had a son from a previous relationship, but said he had moved on and the past was behind him. Julia was convinced she had finally found someone she could be with for a long time. They fell in love, and just a few months later, decided to live together. Julia had hoped that moving to Milan would contribute to her career and increase her personal happiness. She believed Alessandro was the man of her life. However, she did not know what secrets he was hiding or how this decision would change her life. Alessandro Impagnisciello was born in 1993. Although he appeared confident, his life in Milan was far from stable. Working as a bartender in a luxury venue, he was constantly surrounded by wealthy people, celebrities, and important figures from the business world. This helped him carefully construct an image of a man living a stylish life. He was good at making people feel comfortable, quickly formed bonds, and was highly persuasive. He always concealed his true intentions with his charm and relaxed demeanor. He had a stable income and had built good friendships at the bar where he worked. He always presented himself in the best possible light, creating the impression that he was striving for more. His colleagues found him charming, but a bit superficial. He never truly opened up, but was seen as a fun and easygoing person. His customers and friends thought he was living a dream life. However, behind this carefully drawn picture, there was much more. When he started dating Julia, there were no obvious warning signs. On the contrary, he appeared caring and thoughtful at the beginning of their relationship. He knew exactly what to say to make a good impression. However, over time, Alessandro's true face began to emerge. Shortly after they started living together, problems began to arise between them. At first, they would joke with each other, but over time, Alessandro's jokes became more hurtful. He would mock Julia's accent, implying that Southern Italians were very different from Northern Italians. He also made fun of Julia's beloved football team, and he would do this in front of crowds. At first, Julia thought it was a game, but over time, she realized his words were not just words. Their fights became more frequent. Alessandro would get angry over small things. Arguments would erupt over simple matters like the tidiness of the house, Julia's responses, or how she answered his questions. Julia always felt guilty because Alessandro would silence her mid-conversation or ignore her completely. In these moments, he would be cold and indifferent, but the next day, he would act as if nothing had happened. They had grown accustomed to these ups and downs. One day he would be loving and thoughtful, the next day completely indifferent. Julia tried to understand what was happening, but never got a clear answer. It was impossible to know what Alessandro was feeling, because he never said it openly. However, his biggest lie was his double life, and Julia had never noticed it. Julia thought Alessandro worked the night shift at a bar. In reality, Alessandro had been lying about his life for months. Shortly after he started living with Julia, he began seeing someone else, Allegra. He had met her at work. Allegra was young, spoke several languages, and was trying to rise in the hospitality industry. Alessandro acted as if he were single and said his relationship with Julia was over. However, he was still living with Julia. He managed this lie very well. He told Allegra that Julia was looking for a new place to move and would be leaving the house soon. Julia and Allegra were unaware of each other's existence. Alessandro approached each of them with a different persona, constructing his lies, so skillfully that nothing seemed strange. While living in the present with one, he was building dreams of the future with the other. He never thought this lie would one day harm him. At the same time, his relationship with Julia was getting progressively worse. Julia felt that something was wrong, but she couldn't pinpoint what it was. Her unease grew day by day, but Alessandro continued his double game, completely unaware that the truth was steadily approaching. Towards the end of 2022, Julia began to notice some changes in her body. She was constantly tired, had strange cravings, and had missed her menstrual period. Not wanting to wait, she took a pregnancy test. When she saw 2 clear lines on the test, she knew she was going to have a child. Her emotions were mixed upon hearing the news. She had always wanted to start a family, but things with Alessandro had been quite difficult in recent months. Still, she knew she had to tell him face to face. Julia tried to deliver the news at the right time and in the right way. She imagined the reactions people might have to this news: shock, joy, or a little fear. But Alessandro's face was unreadable. After a few seconds of silence, he asked only one question. "Are you sure?" Julia felt that chilling distance between them. He didn't seem to care how she felt or how far along she was. It was impossible to ignore this indifference. In the following days, he never mentioned it again. He made no future plans, showed no interest in doctor's appointments. Julia felt alone, but continued to hope that Alessandro would eventually accept the situation and start showing support. Even as the new year began, Alessandro's mood did not change. Julia found herself spending more and more evenings alone, thinking about her future. Although she continued to work and tried to focus on other things, she began to feel a sense of tension. At the same time, Alessandro's secret life took a turn that no one could have predicted. In early 2023, he learned that his other partner, Allegra, was also pregnant. Along with Julia, Allegra was unaware of the existence of another woman. She was confident, believing her relationship with Alessandro was permanent. However, unlike Julia, Allegra was undecided about whether to continue the pregnancy. As Alessandro saw the lie he had skillfully constructed begin to crumble, he tried to convince Allegra that having a child at this time was not a good idea. He told her he would be behind her no matter what she did, but he was actually signaling that terminating the pregnancy was the best option. Allegra thought long and hard and finally agreed to make this decision. As a way to close this chapter, Alessandro went with her to undergo the medical procedure. Now that Allegra's pregnancy was terminated, he thought he could somehow handle Julia's decision to have the baby, because in his eyes, that was the real major problem. But Julia was determined to remain pregnant. Unlike Allegra, she wanted the baby. Although Alessandro was now emotionally distant from her, he continued to try to change Julia's mind. However, Julia did not listen to him. She had made this decision consciously and on her own. She knew her relationship with Alessandro was ending, but she was ready to take care of the baby by herself. Little did she know that this decision would lead to a major change in her life. With Julia's refusal to have an abortion, Alessandro realized he was losing control over the situation. Julia's strong decision upended his plans, and he had to find another way to get rid of this problem. Towards the end of 2022, he systematically began to research poisons. He searched the internet for ways to harm people without getting caught. He studied substances that were both potent and difficult to obtain. His research covered chemicals found in everyday items, plant-based poisons, and highly dangerous substances, like cyanide and ricin. However, most substances were either hard to get or left distinct traces in the body. He finally settled on rodenticides, which are produced to eliminate rodents. These could be easily purchased from pharmacies without raising suspicion. He learned that some types were slow-acting, causing internal bleeding, weakness, and anemia symptoms that could be confused with those of pregnancy. In early 2023, he put his plan into action. He began adding small doses of this poison to Julia's food and drinks. Soon after, Julia started experiencing strange symptoms like constant fatigue, nausea, and sharp abdominal pains. She told her friends she was feeling sick, but thought it was a normal part of pregnancy. She was unaware that the real truth was much more horrifying. Alessandro had expected the poison to work faster, but the effects were slow. When the results didn't meet his expectations, he became angry and continued to search for ways to make the poison stronger. Still, the results were not satisfactory. Julia was still sick, but her body was resisting, and the baby continued to develop. This situation infuriated Alessandro even more. His first plan hadn't worked, and now he had to think of a new way out of this impasse. Although it seemed like he was in control, everything was slowly slipping from his grasp. He carefully managed the lies he had constructed, knowing exactly what to say and how to explain events to the women. Julia thought he was just going through a tough time and would eventually accept the pregnancy. Allegra was certain that his past relationship was long over. However, a single mistake shattered the image Alessandro had so meticulously built. Allegra began to grow suspicious when she noticed Alessandro became tense every time she talked about his past. Alessandro avoided talking about his history, never showed his social media accounts, and didn't mention his old relationships. At first, this didn't seem strange, but over time, many details started to stand out. The real turning point came when she accidentally saw recent photos of Alessandro with Julia on his phone. In the photos, their closeness and the way they looked at each other clearly revealed they were still in a relationship. Without jumping to conclusions, Allegra decided to be more careful and take mental notes of what was happening. Although Alessandro often said he was leaving work late, his colleagues at the hotel told her he was actually leaving early. Sometimes he wouldn't answer his phone and would then make up excuses that didn't make much sense. When Allegra asked Alessandro about the photos, he immediately came up with an explanation without hesitation. He said Julia couldn't accept the breakup and had deliberately shared those photos to upset her. Allegra wanted to believe him, but his story didn't feel right. When she asked more questions, Alessandro's answers became less and less convincing. Realizing he was losing control, Alessandro quickly changed his strategy. He suggested that not only was Julia unwilling to accept the breakup, but she was also lying about being pregnant. He claimed she had fabricated this lie to tie him to her. He was now trying to convince Allegra that there was no baby. But no matter how desperately he tried, the suspicions only grew. In a final effort to make his lie more believable, Alessandro even forged a fake DNA test. He modified a file he found on the internet to supposedly prove that the baby was not his. At first, Allegra believed this story, but she still had a doubt inside her. Her instincts told her she didn't know everything. A few days later, she decided to find out the truth on her own. While Alessandro was asleep, she used his phone to call Julia. Julia answered almost immediately. The person on the phone didn't sound like someone seeking revenge, but like someone who wanted to find out what was going on. Allegra said they needed to meet face-to-face the next day. Both women knew that what they were about to discuss would change everything. The meeting was to take place at the hotel where Allegra worked. They had set a time, and both were nervous, but determined. Allegra still didn't fully know the extent of Alessandro's lies. Julia couldn't believe the man she planned to marry was living a double life. The conversation started cautiously. Allegra spoke first and explained what she had learned. She stated that Alessandro had told her his relationship with Giulia was over. Then she mentioned the supposed DNA test, which was meant to prove the baby wasn't Alessandro's. Giulia listened carefully. Allegra then quietly said that the test was fake. The pregnancy timeline Giulia described perfectly matched the period when they were together, and Giulia had never presented such a test. More importantly, Giulia and Alessandro were still living together, and Alessandro had never said anything to Giulia about their relationship being over. As the minutes passed, Allegra understood more clearly that the relationship she had been in was a sham from the beginning. She was seeing the truth so clearly for the first time. Although she was hurt and disappointed, she felt no anger towards Giulia. In fact, it was obvious that they were both caught in the same web of lies. In this conversation, which lasted over an hour, they pieced together the small details and unraveled the grand lie Alessandro had constructed. As the game came to an end, they no longer saw each other as enemies. On the contrary, a strong bond was forming between them. It was at that moment that Giulia made her decision. It was over. She didn't want to stay with a man who played with her emotions and secretly led a second life. Alessandro had no place in her future or her child's. When she returned home, she spoke to Alessandro without waiting for the right moment. She told him she knew everything and that they were no longer together. The expected reaction came immediately. Alessandro first said, "I was going to tell you that anyway." Then he got angry, accusing Giulia of prying into his private life. But Giulia didn't care why he was angry. In a strong voice, she told him she was going to Naples and didn't want to see him again. That night, she messaged her mother and sister, sharing the decision she had made. Her family supported her and said they could help with anything. Giulia told them she would be back in a few days, but she would never know. After their final conversation, Alessandro realized he had lost control. Everything he had hidden had come to light: his lies, his double life, and how he used people. Giulia had turned her back, stopped listening to him, and had resolutely decided to leave. The woman's composure, the exposure of his lie, and his loss of control drove Alessandro mad. The fear of losing both Giulia and the image he had built for so long made him feel powerless. They fought a lot that day, and finally broke up. Alessandro was still trying to talk, but Giulia wasn't listening, continuing to pack her things with an expressionless face. He kept saying that what she thought was wrong, because he loved her and she should change her mind. Giulia did not respond. He got even angrier. He shouted very loudly to get her attention, but Giulia didn't argue. When he understood that Giulia's decision was final, he completely gave in to his rage. He grabbed a knife from the counter and, in a fit of fury, attacked Giulia. The attack was so sudden and targeted that Giulia couldn't do anything. She tried to stop him, but fear and panic were not enough. He had completely lost control. After stabbing Giulia 37 times, Alessandro stood over her body and realized the horror of what he had done. Now he knew he had to destroy the evidence. He knew blood leaves traces, so he couldn't leave anything as it was. Just hiding the body wouldn't be enough. He dragged Giulia to the bathroom, poured alcohol on her, and set her on fire, hoping to cover up the crime. However, he saw that the fire didn't do what he expected it to. The fire burned, but it didn't destroy what was left. Behind, he panicked. He had no plan now. He got cleaning supplies and cloths and started wiping the blood from the floors, walls, and furniture. No matter how hard he scrubbed it, the stains didn't come out completely. The apartment still looked like a crime scene. He knew that no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't completely erase what had happened, but he was still confident he could escape responsibility. He didn't know, however, that investigators would soon piece together all the parts and reveal his guilt. With Giulia's body still in the bathroom, Alessandro realized what he had done. His first thought was to eliminate the traces. He tried to burn the evidence, but it didn't work. So he had to come up with a new plan. The first thing to do was to make it seem like Giulia had disappeared. To make it look like Giulia had left of her own accord. He took her phone and started sending messages to her friends and family. He knew everyone would be scared if she suddenly vanished, so he had to make it look like she left voluntarily. He messaged her mother, saying he needed some time alone. The message was short and vague, enough to keep people from getting suspicious. He also messaged one of Giulia's friends, writing that she had left, but wasn't ready to say where she was going yet. He wanted to buy time this way, trying to make it seem as if Giulia had genuinely left on her own. But his plan didn't end there. Thinking that someone would eventually contact the police, he called the police himself a few hours later and reported Giulia missing. He said she had left the house after an argument and hadn't returned. His story was quite straightforward. He had gone to work in the morning, and when he returned in the evening, Giulia was not home. He deliberately added some details to the police to make his story more believable. Giulia's personal belongings, passport, and money were also missing, which suggested she might have left the city on her own. The investigators listened carefully, but from the beginning, they felt that something was wrong. Alessandro's behavior was strange. He spoke with too much confidence, as if he knew in advance what questions would be asked. His calmness was frightening, because Giulia's family and friends were worried and desperate. While the police continued their search, Alessandro was trying to destroy the evidence. He first hid the body in the bathroom, but knew he couldn't keep it there for long. He wrapped the body parts in plastic and moved them to the garage at night. In the following days, he moved these parts several times. First, he hid them in the apartment's basement, then moved them back to the garage. He kept procrastinating because he didn't know exactly how to get rid of them, which caused him to make more mistakes. Investigators began to focus on what Alessandro had said. They spoke with neighbors and looked for gaps in his story. Alessandro still thought he was in control, but the police were slowly closing in on him. When Alessandro reported Giulia missing, the police followed the usual protocol for such cases. The first major clue came when forensic experts found blood in his car. Thanks to modern forensic technology, biological evidence that Alessandro had tried to clean was detected. A quick test showed this blood belonged to Giulia. The second piece of evidence was found in the common areas of the apartment building. There were faint reddish traces on the stairs and in the hallway. At first glance, they looked like dust or a spilled liquid, but chemical tests revealed they were actually partially cleaned bloodstains. Investigators also carefully examined Alessandro's behavior. He did not show the genuine concern most people display when a loved one is missing. He had not asked for help from Giulia's family, nor had he made any effort to publicize her disappearance. He had only initiated the legal process by filing a missing person report, but his lack of action beyond it raised suspicions. When his electronic devices were examined, his computer, phone, and tablet were confiscated. The authorities were shocked by what they found. First, they accessed search records from months before the crime. He had become more knowledgeable by reading about poisons, their effects, and how to harm someone without being seen. Some searches were even trying to understand why certain poisons might not work. The fake DNA test he showed to Allegra was another crucial piece of evidence. A forensic examination revealed that the document had been altered and that the file was downloaded from a website used to modify medical records. As more evidence emerged, it became increasingly difficult for Alessandro to maintain his story. Investigators put more pressure on the suspect and exposed the inconsistencies one by one. At first, Alessandro stuck to his story and said he knew nothing. But with each interrogation, the police presented him with new facts from which he could not escape. They showed him photos of the bloodstains, asked about his search history, and brought in witnesses who had heard shouting and loud noises from their apartment. A major breakthrough that advanced the case was made when Alessandro's movements in the days after Giulia's disappearance were examined. On security camera footage from the days after she was reported missing, he was seen going to the garage several times with bags on his back and returning empty-handed. As the evidence continued to mount, Alessandro's story began to collapse. At one point, he gave up and confessed where he had hidden the body. Giulia's body was found by the police on June 1, 2023, in an area covered with weeds near Sanago. An attempt had been made to burn the remains, but the process was incomplete. According to forensic investigations, the authorities were able to determine the cause of death and obtain strong evidence that the crime was committed by him. Although Alessandro had tried to cover his tracks, he had not succeeded. The tragic death of Giulia Tramontano shook Italy. It was known that crimes against women had long been a major problem in the country. This event was a painful reminder of how dangerous people who act like loving partners can be. Following the arrest of Alessandro Impagnaciello, protests erupted across the country. Women took to the streets demanding harsher penalties for crimes that begin with domestic violence. Memorial marches were held in Milan, Naples, Rome, and other cities. People demanded changes in the system for better protection of the vulnerable. Giulia's sister, Chiara Tramontano, spoke at one of these protests, asking lawmakers to do something by drawing attention to the appalling number of cases where no action is taken before real consequences are faced. At the same time, forensic experts and detectives tried to understand the profile of the person who committed this crime. A psychological evaluation conducted by court-appointed psychiatrists showed that Alessandro possessed disturbing behavioral traits. He had strong narcissistic tendencies and felt no remorse for what he did. His behavior during interrogations and the court process revealed him to be a completely selfish and empathy-deprived individual. He viewed other people only in terms of his own interests, disregarding their feelings or experiences. He did all this to protect his image and not lose control over the people around him. Even the possibility of losing his power triggered an instantly dangerous reaction in him. During the trial, Alessandro tried to show remorse, but neither Giulia's family nor the public believed him. He said he couldn't understand how he could do such a terrible thing himself. He argued that it was a spontaneous outburst of anger and that he did it unconsciously. However, the authorities presented plenty of evidence showing the crime was premeditated. His internet searches about poisons, the attempt to poison someone, the fake DNA test, and the false statement he gave to the police all proved that the murder was not impulsive, but deliberate and planned. After being caught and arrested, Allegra cooperated with the police. She showed the messages they had sent each other, which proved he had lied to both Allegra and Giulia. She also talked about the fake DNA test and explained that he had tried to deceive her many times. During the trial, Allegra was called as a witness because she needed to confirm important details, such as how Alessandro concealed his double life, how he lied about Giulia's pregnancy, and what excuses he used to hide the truth. People in the courtroom said Allegra looked very upset when the truth came out. If she hadn't accidentally found those photos on Alessandro's phone, perhaps everyone would have learned the truth far too late. During her testimony, Allegra spoke of how much guilt she felt towards Giulia, although she had also been deceived. After the case ended, Allegra did not speak to journalists. She stayed out of the public eye and withdrew to distance herself from this tragedy. It was later said that she moved from Milan and settled in another city to start over. The court ruled that Alessandro committed first-degree murder with aggravating factors. These included the brutal nature of the crime, the prolonged emotional abuse of the victim, and the deliberate attempt to destroy evidence. He was sentenced to life in prison. In his closing remarks, the judge clearly stated that such actions could not be explained by a loss of control or short-term emotional turmoil. Alessandro's behavior over several months showed that he wanted to get rid of Giulia. The case of Giulia was a sad reminder that people who see their partners as objects can harm them, but at least Giulia's story was heard. It angered people and inspired a movement to protect those who can still be saved.